Hi, I'm Joe Walensky, and I'm the program manager for Seattle's annual user experience conference called ConveyUX. We've done it 6 times. We're trying for a seventh, and that's coming up March 11th, 12th, and 13th in Seattle. And the full program is posted. And I get a chance to talk with our many interesting presenters that we have on tap. And today I am fortunate to be speaking with Kevin Richardson. Hello, Kevin. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, everything's good. It's kind of a usual late October day here in Seattle down by the waterfront. Where are you speaking to us from?
I'm in Princeton, New Jersey, where it is in the mid 50s today, so kind of an average fall day for us.
Well, we appreciate you electing to be part of the program. For people who may not be familiar with you, why don't you talk a little bit about your background and the types of things that you're involved in?
Sure. I've been doing user experience work for almost 30 years now. I have a doctorate in cognitive psychology back in 1991, and back then it was kind of the military who was designing software pre-internet, really. Who was really interested in people like me because we knew experimental methods and statistics, and since nobody knew much about design, that didn't really matter. And I have always just done user experience work since that September day in 1991. I moved around a little bit, but been almost exclusively focused on the the research and the design, and then later the management of people who were doing complex business problems, mostly relating to software. So not really public websites, not marketing stuff, not web applications, unless they were also part of business software. So that's where my focus has always been.
And do you want to talk a little bit about where you're working now and the nature of that work?
Sure. I work for a company called NVIDIA Technologies here in Princeton, New Jersey. And for the first time in many years, I am now internal UX as opposed to a consultant looking from the outside. And it is an interesting position because I am the first UX person that the company has ever had. But they understand the value of user experience. They have subsisted for many years on their technological expertise and now understand that you can't prolong a usable and useful and maintainable interface forever. So they decided to bring me in to lead the efforts to redesign their suite of software products.
Well, I'm sure that'll be a challenging effort, and we'll get to talking about your conference topic in a minute. But when we were chatting earlier, you mentioned that you'd been thinking about some things related to our profession and where it's been, where it may be going. So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
I have been thinking about that recently. I guess, as you get closer to the end of your career than the beginning of your career, you tend to think about the trajectory you've traveled and where the profession as a whole has moved. And it's been interesting, even in my own lifetime, to have moved from a human factors engineer, which was a position that took the place of industrial engineers. That's why the original human factors people were called engineers, because that's where we fit in the org chart. Um, Through kind of a focus on usability testing to more of a focus on research methods and later design process that were never originally part of user experience, or what we thought we were back then. These were research methods that were borrowed from anthropology and sociology and in truth product design, all of those things were doing what we do now long before we were doing it. What we bring to the table is kind of the research expertise, the rigor around requirements gathering, not only testing and maybe statistics too. But it's interesting to see how we as a profession have moved from kind of that very focused testing place we were, 30 plus years ago, which took the place of the very focused industrial engineers, ergonomics folks, and have moved to a much broader view so that, our profession is now not just the psychologists or the sociologists, but folks coming from all different walks of life. And in fact, one of the things I would love to see us as a profession move towards, since we started out very specific, we then became very broad and very inclusive, which allowed us to do a lot of interesting things from a lot of different points of view. But I think now what we need is more of an emphasis on unified training, a common core of methodology perhaps, or at a minimum, a common understanding of design process. Not saying we all need the same degree, but like any good master's program, for instance, it doesn't really matter where I came from. The broad backgrounds that people bring to a master's program, the better. But then we all need to at least agree on a common set of principles so that we are not reinventing the wheel all the time. One of the problems I have with going to even some of the larger national conferences now is that the topics people talk about and the things they describe as being new and interesting to them were the same topics people were talking about 25, 30 years ago. And they were new and interesting then. So we seem to kind of spin a little bit because I think we don't have as a profession the degree of focus that more formal professions have. But I do feel as though there is some movement toward that, which will become more and more important as we start now expanding into things like augmented reality, new modalities, not simply kind of spoken language, which has been around in very limited senses for a long time. But designing interfaces beyond the screen are going to require us to have an understanding of our own history. In other fields, there are documents you can refer back to and go, oh, this was how people built buildings in the 1800s, or this was how artists created design in the 1400s. We deal in a very ephemeral product. So there is no looking back. There is no, well, what did people do 20 years ago? What did people do last month? That stuff may not exist in the world anymore. So we're forced to kind of recreate things, only learning more about our profession by conferences or, good mentors. But there's a limit to what these individuals can remember and provide. We don't have the sense of history that more long-standing professions have.
Let's talk a little bit about the topic that you'll have at the conference. It's titled "Resolving Areas of UX Tension in Complex Scientific Software." I want you to talk a little bit about what we can expect from that.
Sure. That was a very interesting project that I was asked to do by a company that has a line of scientific measurement devices. These are atomic force microscopes in my case, so they measure really small stuff, like microns. And the software was originally designed by physicists for physicists, so let your imagination run wild. And as long as you were one of those people who were in on the design, it made perfect sense. Anybody since then spends months to become proficient. And nowadays, it's mostly used by grad students in labs, and they don't have months to become proficient. They're only there for a short number of years. They need to be able to learn what they need to do so that they can focus on science rather than the software. And they brought me in to see if I could help them resolve this issue, as well as allow them to expand into more traditional industry markets like hardware design, checking for errors on hard drives and things, right? These are people who don't want to spend any time training. They're basically production line workers. They have to be able to know how to do several things immediately. So it was an interesting bit of work with a short time frame, and it brought to mind the fact that what we as a profession tend to focus on, if we're good at our jobs, is the areas where there is tension, right? Could be between the interface itself, when you're talking just about usability issues, right? Is the button in the right place? Do things act like they're supposed to act? There are areas of tension between the individual and the software, which is kind of traditionally what we tend to focus on. Can we fix the interface for this person? And then there are areas of tension that exist between all of the objects, items, and activities in an individual's, call it information ecosystem, right? Between the individual and other individuals, between the individual and documentation, other devices, the physical environment itself. When you look at how someone relates to a piece of software to do a job, you can infer requirements by looking at these other areas of tension that exist beyond simply the interaction between me and this piece of software. So what I want to talk about in my presentation is what this interface might look like if we designed it using each of those three models. Just usability, so areas of tension within the application itself, just areas of tension between the person and the interface, which is what we traditionally do, and then more broadly, how we might design the interface if we took the larger ecosystem into account.
Well, I think that's going to be a great contribution to the conference program. It's always good to get into discussions about designs that are more on the robust side, and I think it should be a lot of fun. So thanks again for electing to be part of the event, and we'll look forward to having you visit with us in Seattle in March.
Can't wait to be there.